All right, in this section of notes, we're going to be talking about margin of error. And what margin of error really is when we conduct a survey, we need to make a size of your sample large enough so that it accurately represents the population. So we want to make sure that there's as little error as possible. And to do this, we're going to use a little formula to calculate margin of error. So first of all, let's go through what margin of error is. So as we start off here, it says as your sample size increases, the margin of error will always decrease. So what that means is the more people we ask in our survey, the less error is going to be represented, okay? So our definition for margin of error is it gives a limit on how much the responses of our sample would differ if we compare that to the responses of like the whole population, okay? So take a moment here if you need to pause the video and make sure you write in those definitions. All right, so let's go through an actual example. In this example right here, actually I'm gonna just move this here. It says if 40% of the people in a poll prefer candidate A and the margin of error is plus or minus 4%, then it is likely that between 36 and 44% of the entire population prefer candidate A. So what that's saying is what we're gonna do is we have to take the 40% and we have to add 4 to it. That's how we get the 44, and if we subtract 4 from it, 36. So this will be our like interval range of like margin of error. So we could be a little bit bigger, it could be a little bit smaller. There's gonna be a little bit of error when we're doing a survey, okay? So this formula right here is what we use to calculate margin of error. All right, so we do plus or minus 1 the square root of n. N represents what our sample size is. So if we take a look at our first problem here, let me move this out of the way. It says if in a survey there's 1,035 people surveyed, 48% preferred brand A, 9% brand B, and 43% brand C. So they want to know, first of all, what the margin of error for the survey is. So what we need to do is our formula up here. We're going to do plus or minus 1 divided by the square root of n. N is the amount of people we surveyed. So we do square root of 1,535. What you need to do is type this exactly like this in your calculator. Hit 1 divided square root 1535. And when you do that on your calculator, you're going to get 0.026, okay? Then you need to change this to a percent because margin of error is always a percent. So we move that decimal 2 times to the right, 2.6%. That is our margin of error. We always want to do plus or minus in front of that. So it says give the interval that is likely to be obtained in the exact percent of all the people who prefer brand A. So we're going to look up here and only focus on brand A right here. So 48% of people preferred brand A. So to figure out what our interval is, we're going to take 48% subtracted from the 2.6 that we found. That gives us 45.4%. And then we want to do 48% plus 2.6. That gives us 50.6%. So once we have these two answers, we will just show the range. So our range would be 45.4% through 50.6%. So that is our, after the margin of error is taken into account, that's what our survey results would be. Okay, on the back side of the notes, now we're kind of working backwards. They're gonna give you the margin of error, and we're going to find out how many people they actually surveyed. So it says a state legislature conducts a poll to determine if the voters want to increase their property taxes to make highway improvements. How many people were surveyed? So we're looking for people. That's what our answer is. If our margin of error was plus or minus 5%. So what this is going to look like, we're going to plug this into our formula. So we're going to have plus or minus 5% equals plus or minus 1 the square root of n. Okay? First thing you want to do is change this percent to a decimal by moving the decimal point over 1, 2 to the left. That's going to make it 0.05 equals plus or minus 1 the square root of n. Now to get rid of this square root right here, what we're going to do is we're going to square both sides. So I'm going to put a little 2 here, little 2 here. So in your calculator, what you're going to do is 0.05 to the second power. That's going to give you 0.0025. Whoops, sorry. 25 equals, what's going to happen is our square root's just going to disappear. We're just going to have 1 over n. At this point, you could put a 1 underneath there, and it's just a cross multiply problem. 1 times 1 is 1. 0.0025 times n is 0.0025n. Now to solve this, we just have to divide 0.0025 on both sides. So n equals, you type in your calculator, 1 divided by 0.0025, and we get 400 people. And that's how many people were surveyed. All right, same thing on the next problem. It says how many people were surveyed and the margin of the error was plus or minus 3.2%. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just shortcut here. I'm going to go ahead and turn this to a percent by moving the decimal over 2 times to the left. So we get 0.0032 equals 1 over the square root of n. I times both sides by 2, put a little 2 here, 2 here. I put this into my calculator, 0.0032 to the second power, and that comes out to be 0.001024. We do want to write all these numbers out if we're showing longhand because it really does change the answer if we round it, okay? So we want to put all the numbers equals 1 over n. At this point, you can cross multiply or you can start to remember, well, all I have to do is 1 divided by this to get our answer, okay? Because if we cross multiply, you'd get 1 equals 0.001024n, and then once again, we're just going to divide by that number by 1, okay? 0.001024. This will be our answer that once we type in the calculator. And when we put this into the calculator, I believe we get 0.976.5. But we always want to round these up because remember we're talking about people, and you can't have half a person or a quarter of a person. So if there's a little bit of the person left over, let's just bump it up to a whole person. All right, so when you put this in your calculator and we round it, we're going to just call this 977 people.